Slideshow. Okay, I hope that you guys can see my screen. First of all, let me say, let me see if I can. So there is no moderators here. So basically, yes, you can. Great, thank you. So I'm not necessarily going to be able to see the chat all the time because there's no one monitoring it. But I hope that if you have any questions, maybe you can just tell me, or you can put it in the chat, and then I'll try to be monitoring from time to time. Okay. So again, thank you for sharing your morning with us. My name is Emiliano Gomez. I am the director of the UC Berkeley site for the Math Diagnostic Testing Project. There are several sites throughout the state, and as you know, it's a statewide project. It's a sort of a joint venture between the CSU and UC, and also the California Academic Partnership Program. And so I've been the site director for about 20 years, so blink of an eye. And I also teach in the math department at Cal, and I also work for the Lawrence School of Science. I'm sort of a mathematician for the math projects up there, to do professional development, things like that. I have never actually been. I've been to several school classrooms, but I have never actually been the teacher of record of any in a school. So unfortunately, I do not have that experience. So let me, thank you. Hey, Celine. Let me start by saying what we're going to talk about today. And I think that I'm pretty sure that this is going to take less than an hour. I'm going to try to make some time in case there are some questions, and maybe I can try to answer, okay? But the presentation itself should be, I think, substantially less than an hour. We'll see, okay? So, where is it? Here it is. So we're going to talk about informing and implementing equitable course enrollment policy, okay? So how do you decide how to recommend what kids go into what classes, okay? And so let me, the chat is kind of hard to manage here. Here. I'm gonna have to just turn it up. The buttons here. All right. So if you have any questions, I mean, I hope that we have time at the end to maybe I can address any questions. But if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I won't be able to see the chat for now, but I will be maybe checking it from time to time, and definitely when I finish. And also, again, the other way to do it is just tell me if you have a question, okay? Okay, so here we go. So as you know, this Senate Bill 359 is a mandate from the state. It's a California Mathematics Placement Act that came out in 2015. Why can I not see the? Okay, here we go. Which asks, I need to move the participant. I need to do that. Okay, which asks pretty much all schools to come up with a fair, objective, and transparent policy for placement into mathematics classes, okay? And some of the requirements are that there's sort of a two-pronged thing. It should be, there should be a practice that is consistent and that uses multiple measures so that you can be able to recommend students to go into different courses, okay? And the other thing is that it should be, once you do your placement, you towards the beginning of the school year, you should have a checkpoint to see if those placements were correct. Let me see about the chat. So something's happening in the chat. Okay, great, thank you. All right. So there should be a fair, objective, transparent policy for placing students, and then at the beginning of the school year, or close to the beginning, there should be a checkpoint to see if the students have been placed correctly, okay? And so if you look at the bill, these are some of the things that they give for us, part of the rationale for enacting this bill. One of them is they say that student preparation in math is really important for students to be able to succeed or even access certain careers. For example, especially STEM careers, okay? And the success for students in this, to be able to have these choices and to then succeed in college, is really, it's very crucial that they get the appropriate, preparation during high school and middle school, okay? So they should have adequate courses that prepare them for any career, but especially to be able to take, to follow STEM careers. And in particular, ninth grade is a really, really important, the transition between middle school and high school. What are the classes that students are going to take when they get into high school? That turns out to be a really important point that determines, it has very big implications for their future, okay? Especially their aspirations for technical careers or scientific careers or things like that. And unfortunately, it happens to be the case that, of course, if you put students in classes for which they are not well prepared, or if you put students in classes for which they are overly qualified, that turns out to have negative effects, and it happens more. Usually, it happens more to students of color. Okay. All right, especially with successful students of color. Okay, so now when we MDTP, we developed when this bill came out. We have, for a very long time, we have developed what we call diagnostic low-stakes tests, which are called either readiness tests. Basically, we call them readiness tests, but for the middle school, we say we call them grade level preparedness for grades 6, 7, and 8. And then for high school courses, we call them readiness tests for a certain course, like readiness for algebra, readiness for geometry, things like that, readiness for integrated math 1, all the way to readiness for calculus. And so we have had those exams for a very long time, but when SB 359 came out, we actually developed these new tests, which are called the 9th grade assessments. And we have 3 of them. One for 9th grade, one for a general 9th grade for like an algebra 1 or integrated 1, then one for geometry, 9th grade geometry assessment, and then 9th grade second year algebra assessment. And we developed this test to try to help schools comply with SB 359, okay? To be one of the several measures that are objective and fair and transparent that teachers can use and schools can use to make these decisions about enrollment. But if you're going to use an assessment, an MDTP assessment, and I have to say, the 9th grade assessments are not currently available because of the pandemic. These tests need to be taken in a proctored setting, in a one-time proctored sitting. And so until pretty much all the schools can be opened, they're not going to be available. Which means then that our other tests, the readiness tests that we have always had, can actually be tried to be used for both diagnostic purposes and for trying to assist schools in placement of students. And so if you're going to be using this test in this dual capacity, then I think it's good to try to keep in mind the differences between the two types of objectives, right? You can, if you're going to be using an exam for informing or a measure to inform course options, or if you're going to be using it as a readiness diagnostic, okay? So if you're going to be using it for informing course options, that's a summative test. You do it one time, usually towards the end of the previous grade, or very shortly before the students need to get into a course, and you get one feedback once, and then you make a decision, a yes or no, pretty much. Whereas if you do it, if you use the test as a readiness test, this is more a formative usage of the test, and then what you want to do is pretty much inform yourself and the students about how they're doing, what they know, and how you can use that information to help students and to help your instruction. Okay. Oops. Let me see. There's something in the chat. Let me see if I can pull out the chat. Okay. Hi, Kim. Are you here?
I am.
Oh, okay. I thought you had a session.
Here. Hi there. Sorry about that. That was me popping into your session. Nobody popped into mine, so I'm here for you.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you want to do this together then?
It's completely up to you. I was just trying to get onto my other computer where I can actually share my.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Please do. Yeah. So we're going to co-do this together.
Okay, I'm going to drop off of this one and join the other one, and so give me half a second.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Alrighty.
Okay. So the objective, if you're going to be using a measure for informing course options, so what class are the students going to get enrolled in, is basically to see if the students can succeed. It's a yes or no question, right? Do we want them to take this class or not? Where's my cursor here? But if you're going to use it as a diagnostic, as a readiness assessment, then as I mentioned just now, you want to really learn what the students know, and you want to use that to help the program and to help the students. Okay, and as far as the outcome goes, when you're using it for enrollment options, this is pretty much a high stakes, because either the student's going to go into that class or not, which is kind of a high stakes decision. Whereas in the other usage of the test, it's more of a low stakes. You want to basically use the information to reflect, to inform your instruction, and to also inform the students what they need to do to get better prepared. Okay. So here we go. Now, as right now we're in a very, I think teachers are in a really difficult times where there's been distance learning for a while, and now things are starting to change, but it's all very messy. Some schools are going back, some schools are not, some schools are partially going back. There's hybrid models and schedules can be very complicated, that students are slowly transitioning into face-to-face, hopefully face-to-face learning again. But still, we do have that most tests are still being given in students are taking the test at home. And so we have developed a policy, basically, and an agreement for that teachers can try to follow when they use our tests and during distance learning. Okay, so you can use our tests, but as I said, you cannot use the assessment, the 9th grade assessment platform yet, because that's gonna remain closed until we can go back to schools. Okay, and so these diagnostic results that you get from our platform, you can use them to basically learn about what students, the first thing that you can try to do is, it's probably a good thing to do, is to first see what the strengths are, right? What are the students really got down, what do they really know, and you can build from there. But then you can also see what are the areas where there's been unfinished learning, especially now with this very difficult last year. There might be some significant unfinished learning or gaps or misunderstandings, okay? And you can use that information to inform your class, your practice, and to try to help students where they are, okay? And On the other hand, especially since we don't have the 9th grade assessments, you can also use our tests or readiness tests to be one of these several measures that help you inform your enrollment decisions, okay? But it can also prompt discussions about, inside the math department, among colleagues to see, what are the things that we're doing well, what are the things where we need to improve, okay? And so for example, one thing you can do using the MDTP results is two different kinds of professional learning that can happen that I can give you as an example is you can have conversations between different grade levels. So what are the students, how are the students doing in this class? How well prepared are they as they come into the class? What can we have a conversation between the teachers from the previous grade and the teachers from the next grade to see about some sort of vertical alignment of the curriculum or the things that students really need to do to be successful in the next class. Another example would be, for example, you can find that in a given school, you look at the results and there may be a teacher who has really, really good results in some topic for the students' tests. And oops, I need to connect my computer. And then that can be a really good source of information and can be a conversation about, okay, tell us how are you teaching this that is working so well, and that can be something that everybody benefits from. Okay, let me check the chat because there's a couple of chat here.
I'm going to answer the chat for you, Emiliano.
Okay, great. So there's a question about what's the difference between assessment of preparedness and readiness tests. Do you want to take that, Kim?
Sure thing. So I just actually put it in the chat. So
okay, great. Yes.
The readiness tests do have 45 items, and the assessments, 9th grade assessments have 40. Generally, the last 5 items are your more difficult items. So the level of difficulty on the readiness test is higher. So if you're comparing results over last year versus this year, you will probably have your results won't be quite as high. It's not the same measure. They have the same topics. They cover mostly the same content, but they're not parallel. They have no items that are exactly the same. They have some parallel items, which means that they're just very, very similar. But generally the readiness tests are a little bit more difficult. That's okay. Passing back to you, Emiliano.
Kim, let me do a couple more slides, and then do you want to do the 6 guidelines?
Sure, I'll talk about guidelines. That's great.
Okay, let's do that. So if you're going to be giving these exams remotely, one of the recommendations that we have, if you're able to do this, there may be some privacy or legal issues, but if you can, we recommend that you proctor, with Zoom or Google Hangouts or something like that. Okay. Where is my arrow here? Okay. And this is something that you're going to hear over and over, and it's also part of the bill, SB 359. There should be multiple measures to inform enrollment, next course enrollment, okay? If you're using MDTP as one of them, it really should be just one of several measures. Something to keep in mind is that when the tests are taken remotely, the kids are at home, the validity and reliability of the test, something that I'll say a few words about that later on when we talk a little bit about the statistics of CUT scores. They may be somewhat compromised. This is even more of a reason to use multiple measures to inform enrollment, okay? All right, so what we recommend, of course, is that you follow the guidelines of the bill of the SB 359 to use fair, objective, and transparent measures, okay? That there should be multiple measures, and something that's really important is that the criteria should be applied systematically to all students. You shouldn't have different criteria for different subgroups of students for this, okay? And then we really recommend that we actually have some guidelines that we develop to help teachers make this sort of decision. And this is what Kim is going to talk about next, okay? Kim, do you want me to forward the slides and you tell me when?
Yeah, that'd be perfect. So if you can go ahead and just put all the bullets out at once.
All the bullets at
Yeah, and then
once?
that way, then we don't have to wait. So go ahead and.
Like that?
I think that's good. And then, yep, there is a chat question. Let's see here. Do you want to? So how can we easily share their student results with students in this virtual environment? When you go into the reporting, if you go into individual analysis or individual report, individual scores, individual results is what's called. Sorry, it's a tab. You go in there, each student, then you can click beside their name and you can download a PDF file that's just a student letter for that student. So it used to be that those reports were embedded in a huge PDF with all the results and every student was in there, but we broke it apart one by one, specifically so that you could get those individual, you can email them to each student individually. So it's going to be a matter of, downloading 30 for your class, but it's easier than breaking a PDF apart, and especially since we're remote. Another thing real quick that Emiliano, I don't think he was in the grade option. Yeah, thank you. In the keynote is that with us moving into grid tiers, I know that all the districts are making plans to come back to school. So when that happens, we will open up the 9th grade assessment platform. It could open as early April.
Oh, really? I did not know that. Okay, that's great.
Yep. So I'm just keeping my eye on the big districts, LA Unified, Long Beach, San Diego Unified, Sacramento Unified. Okay, Emiliano, I'll let you take over the chat and I'll start talking now. So this idea about using multiple measures is really important. It's the key, like Emiliano said, it's the first criterion of the actual bill. So criteria 1 is to avoid just using a cut score as a primary criteria. So I gave some examples from some different districts that we work with. One district used what they called was multiple filters. They called it filters instead of measures. This was actually an elementary transitioning students from 5th grade to 6th grade. And so they wanted these filters in there. They looked at student achievement, which was their course grade, end of course exam score, and the MDTP. They looked at student effort and work habits, so homework, attendance, and citizenship, and teacher recommendation. So those are all those different pieces together to look at. Additionally, cut scores isn't always the most informative measure that we have for MDTP. It's actually the least valuable measure is a score. So if you click on the next slide for me, Emiliano, I'll explain that. I think it's on criteria 2. So we recommend using the topic scores, the total score, so the overall score, and topic scores. So if you can avoid using just cut scores, sometimes it's better to use a cut score and or a combination of topic scores. So if you were in the first keynote session, you know that all MDTP tests are aligned to topics. So one district that was using the, doing the translating students, or matriculating students from grade 8 to grade 9 was looking at placing students into an advanced course. So they determined qualifying achievement to be meeting one of the following, at least one. So at least 70% overall correct. Or they could answer 3 questions out of 5 in integers, and 2 questions out of 4 for exponent square roots, and 3 questions out of 6 for linear equations and inequalities. In other words, they went through the topics and defined which topics are really important, what's the most important thing the students need to know to be successful in the course they're going to, and define those topics and that number of items. Now, they also had a near qualifying achievement. So these are students that they were recommending to be placed in the course, but probably with some intervention support. Those students answered 3 questions out of 5 for integers, or 3 questions out of 6 for linear equations. So they're giving some options for students that are independent of just a cut score. Okay, next. Give students feedback. So one of the things that the chat came out was, how do we get students the feedback? So we do provide letters. The letters tell the students how they're doing in each topic, how many and if they met the critical level, basically saying congratulations if they did, or you need review in if they're 1 away, or you need substantial review if they're more than 1 away from meeting critical levels. So if you are giving the test, the readiness test, as Emiliano is talking about here, then you will get actual scores in those topics. If you're giving the 9th grade assessments, we don't provide scores because we do not have critical levels when you're using it for the purpose of informing their next course. It's up to the district and schools to do that, but they get the qualitative results. It's really important for students to get the feedback. It's one way for them to advocate for themselves and to seek some intervention or help. And especially if you have some program in place where students can bring their results, they can get help. At UC San Diego, we have these diagnostic tests for students in those courses, in our preparatory courses, which is pre-calc, and our entry-level calculus courses, Calc 1, Calc 2. The students actually bring their diagnostic results with them to tutoring and their SI lessons, sessions, just so that they have something to look at. And also, as you're talking to students about their topical readiness, they kind of have more of a sense of their strengths and maybe what they might need support in. Okay, Emiliano, can you advance?
Yep.
Thank you. So guideline number 4 is to think about students who might be close to a range, a cut range, or whatever you determine to be one level to the next. And students who are close to that, maybe if they're a little lower, allowing them to enroll in that higher course and providing them support such as co-requisite coursework. I talked about SI with supplemental instruction that we have at post-secondary, but there could be some data-focused tutoring that you can also align to students based on what they're learning from the diagnostic results. So this allows the students who are at a high end of the class to enroll in that higher class. They're at the high end of they just didn't make it in. And it's also supports students who are at a low end, so they just barely made it in. Having those kind of supports also helps to ensure that those students will have access to the content and support throughout. If you can create some successful support strategies and programs, it does allow you to lower your cut ranges to allow more students access to that higher level mathematics.
Okay.
2 more, I think. Yep. This one is there only 2 bullets? Keep going. I think there's probably more. There you go.
Yeah.
I can't speak on this one enough. Really, it should not be one person making decisions. You should employ all the local experts. So not only the faculty teaching the current course students are in, but the course they're going into and the next level is always important to get that vertical alignment of where students have been, the experience they've had, where they're going and where they need to be. So that you can work collaboratively to determine what your criteria range for enrolling in different coursework. So what I think about when I do this is look at the measure. So imagine you have the test. Now I like paper, so we do have PDF evaluation copies we can send you so you can look at it. I like to look at paper. I like to look at item. I'm also going to look at the screen, but you can see item by item. And with your group of people, you would do this. Item 1, is this a yes or no? In other words, does every student coming into this course need to know this item? Yes or no? Usually item 1 is a yes. So you say yes. Item 2, yes or no. And you go through each item until you basically have all the absolute musts the student must know. That gives you kind of an idea about a cut score. And then you can also evolve out into how they align to topics, but this should be done collaboratively. The ETS has a really great publication on setting cut scores. If you like statistics and you want to get your geek on, that is a really, it's a very densely statistically put together. It's a fantastic, fun read about setting cut scores. And then I think I have one more. A few more, I think a couple more clicks. Maybe one more. Oh, no, I was wrong. Sorry, go back. Yep, thank you. Okay, sure. Evaluate your measure. Once you have your policy in place, you need to check to see how it's working. And this should be done every year you implement your measure. So you look at your decisions and you evaluate the outcomes. So how are students in each one of those enrollment decisions, how are they doing and how's that measure working? I actually am the director of math testing placement at UC San Diego. So I do these evaluations every year for the math department on our measures to make sure that the measure is working in the way that it should be. We look at the end of course grades, that the courses the students are enrolled and complete, and how that measure correlated to determine whether it was a good predictor or not, was doing what it's supposed to be doing. We learn things. Of course, the content changes, the student background changes, just different things change. So over time, you might need to change your measures. So it's really important that you adjust your policy when you see that the data shows that. And like I said, you should do that at least every year. Well, it should do that every year if you're using it for, like right now, to place students into the next course. And I said the P word, we're not supposed to say that. So enroll students in the next course. All right, Emiliano, that's good for me.
Okay, so I'm gonna let you in charge of the chat, okay, Kim, for a moment?
I got the chat, you got it.
Okay, so I'm gonna say a few words about cut scores and statistical errors that you have to deal with when you set cut scores. I think that, well, actually, I'll say that a little later. So there's a difference between what we call the observed score and the true score, right? So if I'm a student in your class and I take a test, say I take your test and I get 70%, okay? Now that is the score that you record on your grade book, and you know, the one number that you can see. And so that is what we call the observed score. All right. Now, maybe that day I just had a great day and I was really focused, well rested, you know, well fed, everything, the stars aligned, and I just did really, really well. And most other days, if I had taken the test on another day, most likely I would have had a lower score, okay? Or maybe that was a terrible day for me. Maybe I just didn't sleep, or I was very worried, or something tragic happened. I was distracted, a number of things. And maybe that 70% that I scored was not indicative. Maybe on most other days, I could have scored 80 or 90%. So what teachers, what we see is as an observed score, but there's something else that's called the true score, and that is something that we actually don't know, at least not from one single testing. That is the true score is something that the score that you will be getting if you were able to administer the test many times under exactly the same circumstances, and of course, we're assuming that the student always is taking it for the very first time, which is impossible. So that would be the true score. It's the expected value if you would be able to do this many times. So you can think of the score that you get, the observed score, is, you can think of it as the actual true score plus a random error that could be a positive or negative error, okay? And so because of that, it's going to necessarily lead to, when you make decisions about cut scores for enrollment, to false negatives and false positives. What are those things? Okay, so a false negative is what happens when you have an observed score that is lower than the cut score, but the true score is actually at or above. So that means that a student does not make the cut, even though from the testing, even though the true score, most times that student would have made the cut score. And a false positive is the other way around. That happens when the actual observed score is above the cutoff, but in reality, the true score would have been lower than the cutoff, okay? And then that's what happens when a student, in the case of an enrollment decision, the student gets enrolled in a class for which maybe they're not well prepared, okay? This is again one of the many reasons why you should use multiple measures, and especially avoid cut scores as a single or even as a primary decision maker. There are many reasons why students may just not have an observed score in a single test that's indicative enough. Okay. Whoops, where's it? Okay. So there will be this kind of errors. And if your data, if you're dealing with a large enough number of students, there is absolutely no question that these errors will occur. It's impossible to avoid them. Why? Well, first of all, there can be no test, no matter how much time you spend, designing a test, and we spend a lot of time designing tests and revising them and looking at their statistics and field testing. We take 3 or 4 years to write a test or to even rewrite a test. But it can never be perfectly reliable or valid. What does reliable and valid mean? Well, reliability is a measure of consistency, basically. It means that if you administer the test many times to many students, you would expect a similar distribution of scores, a similar, individual items and topics, and the whole test would look more or less the same as far as central tendencies and measures of spread and things like that. But validity is more of a judgment call. It's more a question of accuracy. Does this test actually measure what you want it to measure? Is it a good measure for your purposes? Okay. Does it do what it's intended to do? Okay. And no test can perfectly fit your objectives. Okay. So not only that, but also the method of setting your cut scores is also pretty much an empirical thing. And this is one of the reasons that you should evaluate constantly, see how students are doing in subsequent courses and make sure that you make adjustments appropriately. And as we just saw, the other reason is that the scores, there's some randomness in the scores. You just have the observed scores. You don't really know the complete picture. You can never really know it. So something to keep in mind is that errors will occur, but also that, of course, this is obvious, they're more likely to occur for students that are near the cutoff score, whose true score is near that cutoff. So for students who are near the cutoff, that's going to be, it's really important to try to look at those cases carefully. And I think that Kim mentioned one of the important things to try to do is to have structures in place to help, to have interventions or other kinds of assistance in place for students who are at the cutoff score, so that you may be able to allow those students the correct opportunities. Okay. So since you're going to have to deal with these potential errors, and especially deal with situations where what to do with students who are close the cutoffs, I think it's important to have a pretty honest and open discussion, first of all, about your policy, about your enrollment decisions, and especially about the relative harm that false negatives or false positives can occur. Okay, so for example, you may think that false negatives are really negative influence because what happens is that you're denying access to many students, okay, who maybe should be allowed access into courses, and that can really impact the opportunities that those students will have if they're not allowed to take certain classes. On the other hand, if you have a number of false positives, that can also have very negative consequences. A student may be enrolled in a class for which they're not prepared, and then maybe they will need to retake that class in the future. That would really impact their own identity around math and agency. And so, no matter how you look at it, there can be some negative consequences either way. So what is your policy around that? Which are you going to, which ones are you going to try to eliminate more? Do you want to have fewer false negatives or fewer false positives? Once you have an idea of where you stand there, then of course you can try to make a decision about adjusting the cut score, because if you raise or lower the cut score, you will increase the number of one of these false positives or negative, but you will increase one and decrease the other. So if you want to reduce the false negatives, okay, that means you lower the cut score, but that will of course, if you you reduce the false negatives, but that will increase the false positives. And the other way around, if you want to reduce the false positives, then you can consider raising the cut score, but that will inevitably give you more false negatives, okay? So you wanna have a discussion about that before you make those decisions, all right? And again, that's why it's really important to consider multiple measures, not just base your decisions on a very, very few points of data. All right, Kim, do you wanna take this over?
Actually, you're doing great.
Okay, I can keep.
I mean, I can do it, but I think you're doing fine.
Okay, we're
It's
almost,
up to you.
the presentation is almost over actually, and then we will have some time for questions, okay?
Okay, did you want me to do this part then? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's basically the last slide, but it's just the description of the different types of assessments that we offer.
That's right. And we did provide this in the keynote. So if anybody went there, this will be also a review.
Oh, okay. So we have the grade level assessments of preparedness, and those are the readiness for grade 6, grade 7, and grade 8. Yeah, those are readiness tests. We have the course level readiness tests, which are tests that diagnose readiness for a given high school course, like Algebra 1 or Integrated Math 1, all the way through Integrated Math 3 or readiness for calculus, okay? Again, those are also diagnostic readiness tests. And we have the 9th grade assessments, these 3 tests that we developed to try to help schools comply with SB 359, which are intended to be given at the end of 8th grade or the very beginning, at the end of 8th grade, right? And to try to help schools make an informed decision about the class that the students are going into in 9th grade. Like we mentioned, these assessments can only be, so the readiness tests can be taken online, which most people are doing these days, but also once we come back face-to-face, they can also be taken on paper. But the 9th grade assessment tests are only online, and right now the platform is closed until we can, until most schools are open, and because as we mentioned, these ones are, you need to take these in one sitting, and it needs to be a proctored test. Where the readiness test can be taken over multiple days, in fact, if you want. You have to close the test and then open it again, but you can do that, okay? And then we also have written response items. And you can see, you can access them through our website. I think you need to ask for, is that right, Kim? You need to ask for us to send them the written response items, or can they just find them there?
That's correct. I will put a link in the chat if and they can get there directly, since we just vet all of the instructors first, make sure that you are should have access. We don't provide them to tutor groups or to
right. We want to make sure.
Student parents. So I vetted everybody ahead of time to get links to get here. So I will do that. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, and these are really great, more open response type of tasks that are aligned to the different topics of the different tests that we develop. But each of the items, we do not grade this, but we do provide with that. We provide what we call an essence statement, which contains a complete solution. We also provide a rubric, a suggested rubric for you to be able to grade it. And we also provide some suggested extensions of these activities for each of the items. By the way, we also have MDTP in the website. We also have learning modules, right, that are linked to the topics of the different tests. And I think that was the end of the presentation, but we do have about, I don't know, something like 10 or 15 minutes if you guys want to ask us any questions.
So Emiliano, there's a question in the chat about alternative assessments for administer for students who may produce false negatives.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share of the screen, okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry, there's a question about alternatives for students who have false negatives.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, if the student is close, so I think you should look at many measures. That's really important to look at the kind of student that we're talking about here. Is this a student who is really willing to try? Is this a student whose attendance and engagement in class and homework are good? and then if the scores are relatively close to the cutoff, I think it's really important to try to have support structures in school to be able to help the students. If you do that, you may be able to actually pull the student into the higher level class, and maybe have some core requisite coursework requirement and things like that. Make sure that you pay attention to the students, group them with students that can produce productive small group collaborations and things like that, that you can you can try to monitor the progress of the student, and it's very, very likely if the student does meet these requirements about, positive attitude and close enough in readiness, you should be able to help them. I think that's my take on it.
So one of the things I think Emily had put in the chat too is like, do we have other measures? We don't have different tests, like diagnostic tests, but we do have written response items. And if you find a written response item that might get out of student thinking around a topic that you think is really important, that student should have some background understanding in to be successful in that course, a written response item might be a really great way for you to elicit more information. So I think it would be not to give another assessment in terms of giving another diagnostic test, but maybe giving them a written response item to try to get out what they're really understanding about some key idea in a topic. So that might be something. I did put the link in the chat for the response items. We have about 37 there. We also have field test written response items. I'm going to put that in the chat too. And I'm going to ask, if you use a field test item, we need some data. So these have not been vetted completely. They haven't been actually taken by students and graded by teachers. So if you use a field test written response item, if you could score one class set, not all your students, just one class set, and score them using our rubric, if you could scan the papers and then just send us an electronic email to mdtp.ucsd.edu. I'll put that in, let me put that in there, mdtp@ucsd.edu. If you can give us the results there, then we can actually analyze those and make them non-field tests. So I'll put that link in. Another question came to me personally is like, what supports do we recommend? I taught high school math for 20 years before I became the director of MDTP. I used MDTP for 13 of those years as an instructor. So supports that I would put in place is one thing that I would do is just work with students tutoring. Like they would come into my classroom. Right now we have office hours because they're coming to Zoom, but they would be structured in a way that it's getting out your data specifically. And I would actually create topic-based office hours. So today we're going to talk about linear functions. We're going to talk about a certain topic. I gave a lot of things called benchmark assessments. So they were regular assessments over time, the same type of exit level skill. So students had some feedback to come back, and then they had something really focused to talk about. But I think that any type of a focused topic-based support is great. If you have supplemental instruction, or if you have any ideas about if you're in a secondary school and want to think about what that means, maybe do a little bit of research on supplemental instruction, and maybe you can start a program like that at your school. I think those are great ways of support. After school tutoring, a lot of schools do that. I know we're not on campus right now, so what does that look like? It's office hours, right? So those are just some ideas.
Some other things that come to my mind are, I think there's a difference between providing support and lowering expectations. We don't want to lower expectations for students, but we can make accommodations that, depending on their circumstances. And sometimes some students may need more time to take a test or to submit a homework, or they may need an opportunity to resubmit some work, things like that, that don't lower the bar, but that do provide them with an opportunity to make up work or to show that they can do the work. It just maybe at a different, if they're willing to put in more time in it.
Amy, which level are you bridging your students for? For what grade level?
Well, we're looking at, hi, thank you so much. I'm so excited about this. Thank you for inviting me this morning. We're looking at incoming ninth graders, as well as our incoming 10th graders because they have missed already a semester of in-person learning in their 9th grade, and then the whole 10th grade, which is M2, you know, it's completely virtual. So we're looking at those two groups specifically, but I only have 3 weeks. I'm wondering if
So I'm gonna recommend that you come to my session next on April 17th that nobody came to this time. That's okay. I'm happy to help Emiliano, but my session talks about strategies for bridging and how I use some of the MDTP, the modules and the response items to do an 8-week bridge course. You're talking about 3-week bridge course. We did support MDTP. Actually, I wrote curriculum for a 3-week bridge support from students exiting 8th grade to 9th grade in LA, out of the LA region area. So there's quite a few districts that were in that. That was all about proportional reasoning. So I was very specific about that bridge. If you want to reach out to me privately, I can send you that curriculum. You can get a hold of me. I know at MDTP at ucsd.edu. I put
also,
in the chat.
our website does have a bunch of learning modules.
Yeah.
And you can click in there and look for this. So what happens is that, you know, when students score, you know, not very well on certain topics, you can look at those topics in the learning modules and see there are some activities and designed for re-engaging students with those gaps.
I'm actually going to share my screen real quick so you can see what they look like. Learning modules were designed from students who are bridging into a course to UC San Diego several years ago, but they map back the misconception, basically where it happened, and then bridged back to pre-calculus level. So if you start at a linear module 1, you'll see that module 1 starts with patterns and multiple representations and graphs. So this goes into, this would be a really great module for students exiting 8th grade going to 9th grade or 9th grade to 10th grade, this particular module. But as you get higher into the module, it's going to go more advanced than where they're at. So it goes into absolute value, inequalities, which might be a little bit more than you want to take them. But this is great. I really love this. I actually wrote this one because, and I used it with my bridge students, just looking at making connection, or actually the lessons are, I want to go back, sorry. They start with an explore. So we start with things like, what do you notice and what do you wonder? Here's some patterns. They give them solutions. These are also student-centered, so they can do this on their own. They don't need you. You just need to tell them what they want to do, what you want them to do. Then this is steps and squares. So we gave a pattern and we asked them to do several things. But if you look at the worksheet for the pattern, it's really cool. It brings in multiple representations for the pattern. So they have to describe it, draw it, step 0, step 4, what's going on in step 4. They have to draw it, they have to talk about it in a table, they have to graph it, and then they come up with an equation and they predict, or they use their equation to tell how many squares are in step 100. So this is the linear modules. We have them, as Emiliano said, they're aligned to topics. The rational expression starts off with adding fractions. So yes, again, 7th grade material, but if you go into the end, we're doing asymptotes and graphing rational expression. So it's bridging them back up to that. It doesn't keep them there, it bridges all the way up. So this is free, and I will put these in the chat. It's just so you guys have that resource. Sorry if I took over on that. Let's put that back in there. So go to everybody. Okay, there you go. So somebody said, how many weeks is the bridge course? The one that I'm going to talk about in my session on April 17th was 8 weeks. And the one that I have curriculum for is about 3 weeks. Emiliano, you want to take the next one from Kristen? I'm going to stop sharing.
Well, I'm actually not sure how to answer your question, Kristen. So it's a really interesting question. What are the specific categories that districts have used? I don't know where you are, actually. As you know, what are the different categories for teacher recommendation measures? Because they've used yes or no. And I know of at least one district that, in fact, does not allow teacher recommendations at all.
Wow.
Because, you know, well, there's a lot of politics involved in that. It varies a lot, the weight that you give to the teacher recommendations. My take on it is that teachers are the people who are best qualified to, you know, to tell you about a student, teachers who have had those students. So I like to hear what teachers have to say.
Yeah.
But what specific categories are there? I'm not really sure actually how to answer the question. I don't know. Maybe some of you guys, like, I don't know if you, Celine, if you dealt with this question in your district, or if anyone else can answer that question for Kristen, what you guys are doing.